Good afternoon. It's 4:30. We're going to spend about an hour and 15 minutes going over 3 bonus chapters. Bonus Chapter A, working within the legal environment. Then we will skip to Bonus Chapter C, which is talking about taking risk. And then finally to Bonus Chapter D, which is about personal finance. So let's look at the objectives for this chapter. Define business law, distinguish between statutory and common law, and explain the role of administrative agencies. Define tort law and explain the role of product liability in tort law. Identify the purposes and conditions of patents, copyrights, and trademarks. Describe warranties and negotiable instruments as covered in the Uniform Commercial Code. List and describe conditions necessary to make a legally enforceable contract, and describe the possible consequences if such a contract is violated. Summarize laws that regulate competition and protect consumers in the U.S. Explain the role of tax laws in generating income for the government and as a method of discouraging or encouraging certain behaviors among taxpayers. Distinguish among the various types of bankruptcy as outlined by the Bankruptcy Code, and finally explain the role of deregulation as a tool to encourage competition. Now, we have in the course covered some of what we're going to cover here, but this does a little bit more in depth, and I think it gives us a better understanding, because we need to know these things if we're owning and operating a small business, want to start a small business, or even in business working for someone else. We have laws. All civilized societies have laws. It is something to tell people what correct behavior is. No, it is not ethics. No, it is not morality. Some of it does come from ethics and morality, but it really tells us how we're supposed to behave in situations. And of course, we have laws because some people really don't want to conform to society norms, and so we need to do something to tell them that what they're doing is really not acceptable. So we have a judiciary, and the purpose of the judiciary in many cases is to interpret the law. That's what the federal court systems do. Yes, there are some people who go to trial in federal court, but by and large, especially the appellate courts and the Supreme Court, define what law is. And of course, we have the judiciary at all levels in our system: city, county, state, and then the federal level. Criminal law simply tells us what's not acceptable. And now this deviates again a little bit from civil law, which also tells us what's not acceptable, but does not rise to criminal law. Criminal law requires punishment of some kind. That punishment can be jail, it can be a fine, it can be both, and people are prosecuted for that. In a civil trial, notice it says you're covering non-criminal acts, and we think of things there, as it's mentioned there, personal injury, divorce, and things of that nature. In a civil trial, there is not a prosecutor and a defense attorney. There is a plaintiff, the person bringing the suit, and the defendant, person defending him or herself against the suit that has been filed. We have a third area called business law, and this establishes rules, policies, regulations, etc., that provide the framework, the legal framework, in which businesses can operate. Now, setting aside business law, we have three major areas of law. Statutory law, that is law that is written into a statute, a law passed by the United States Congress, passed by a legislature in the state, or it could be a county or a municipal law. Common law is what we know that has come down to us through precedent of various and sundry legal rulings. It is not statutory law. And the people who enact statutory law, let's talk about the federal level, act of Congress signed into law by the president, can overturn a judicial ruling. It's often difficult to do that because the judiciary has defined what the law is and whether the law that was formulated is legal. It conforms to the Constitution of the United States. But they can be overturned. Common law, as I said, comes down to us and give you some kind of a common law. I know that people may not like what I'm going to say, but I want to use this because this is probably the one that most of us can identify with. And that is the legality of a woman choosing to have an abortion in the United States. You will not find that in the Constitution. There is nothing in the Constitution that uses that terminology, uses the word abortion. That rule, that law, if you will, was actually founded on or buttressed by the right to privacy. And that is in the Constitution. You know, a number of states are trying to overturn that, and there have been cases come before the Supreme Court, and we're liable to see it change. I'm not saying we will, I'm not saying we won't, but that possibility exists. So that we have to think about that. And then precedent really comes from what judges have done before, and what they're doing here is they're taking what's already been done and they're using that as precedent. And saying, okay, we've already set that, we've decided that, this particular case conforms to that precedent, therefore we're going to follow the precedent that's already been set. Now, the United States also has a number of administrative agencies, usually we think of them usually at the federal and the state level, although many counties have them, and certainly cities have them as well. And these are institutions, if you will, the better term we don't like to use, bureaucracies, have been set up by the governing folks, people who wrote the laws, to police these particular areas. And the reason we do that, let's look at the federal level. There are 538 legislators in the U.S. Congress, 100 senators, 438 representatives. Those folks do not have enough time to go out and do all the policing, and so they have given that administrative duty to the policing to various agencies, and some of them are mentioned here. I'm not going to go through them. So whenever you hear someone railing about, I'll use the IRS because that's one people really love to fuss about. Whenever you hear of people saying, well, the IRS is doing something and they're unelected officials, we have to remember that the United States Congress gave them the authority to do what they do. It's not somebody else. It's not something that was created out of the thin air. And if you want to use the IRS returns $4 or $5 to the United States Treasury for every dollar it uses to operate itself. And these are just administrative federal agencies. I'm not going to go through this. You can see this in your text. That's figure A1 on page A4. Now, this is something that we want to talk about, and that is what is tort law. And you have to remember a tort is considered a harm. injury, if you prefer, that one person caused to another person or to another person's property, and or finally to that person's reputation. And it can be intentional, which means it's willful, or was thought of beforehand. That is, I'm going to go out and beat this person on the knee. Now, I didn't just drum that up. You might remember a few years ago, we had a case where one female skater was concerned that the other was going to beat her out, and had some people go in and beat this woman on her knee to incapacitate her. Well, incapacitation didn't work, but she was found out. She was tried and convicted, and her two henchmen were tried and convicted. Negligence, on the other hand, is unintentional. I didn't really mean to do that, but it was caused by my not paying attention to things that I should have done. Now, negligence often comes, or we hear of negligence often associated with product liability. We have to think about product liability, and what product liability simply says is we, and where I say we the general public, through the government, hold manufacturers or businesses liable for harm that their products cause to an individual. Could be because of the way they were designed. We hear that in children's toys quite often. We didn't tell people that improper use is going to cause some problems. Now, somebody is going to tell me, I know, because I've heard this before and I understand. Well, if people buy the product, they don't know how to use it. That's true. I admit that. And I think we all should admit that. But sometimes people don't understand how to use something, or they think they know how to use something and then they use it improperly. And so there ought to be some kind of warnings that, if you do this, this is what's going to happen. People need to know that. We do that in academia. We say, if you don't do your assignments, there's the consequence. If you get too many unsatisfactory grades, you're not going to pass the course. Simple as that. Strict product liability is something a little bit different. This is without regard to fault. This is where I'm reading this to you because it's important to distinguish between the two. A company can be held liable for a defective product even if they didn't know of the defect. Now, that's probably fairly rare, but it is there. It's something that you need to know about. This next slide just gives us an idea of product liability cases, which many of us have heard about. The first one, by the way, you can see this figure A2 at the top of page A6. Ford Motor Company, Jack in the Box, Sara Lee, General Motors, etc. Now, here we're talking about trade patents, trademarks, and copyrights. Notice what a patent does. If a patent is granted, it gives the manufacturer, and I'm using the term manufacturer, it could be a service provider, but normally we think of this as an intangible product, exclusive right to manufacture and sell that product for a 20-year period of time. At once upon a time, a patent could be renewed. That's no longer the case. Many times what happens is toward the end of the patent period, people who make generics, I'm using that term for drugs, but other things, will start working on the product and be ready to come out with a less expensive brand. A copyright is in a way similar to a patent, but it does not expire. It gives the business that created the copyright or created what we think of as a trademark that becomes copyrighted, right to do this over a period of time. And here we talk about books, articles, photos, paintings, cartoons, etc. Those are considered, what I just mentioned there, are considered intellectual property. And film would be in that. some other type thing, some type of art and things of that nature would be in that area. Paintings, it mentions here, I'm using art in a different and a broader term. So let's take a publication, the book. Normally speaking, the copyright for a book is given to the author, the author's heirs, or to the publisher for a period of 50 years. And then after that time expires, the copyright can be renewed, and it can be renewed in various and sundry ways. A trademark is a little bit different. It's kind of like a copyright. I like to think of it as a copyright, but it's a little bit different, obviously, because you have a symbol like Coke or Pepsi or GM or Ford that have copyrights. And they have legal protection to use that name, and nobody else can do it. Also goes on to talk about a symbol or design that specifically identifies what is made or the service provided with a specific company. Now, I'll give you an idea. Pardon me. Many of you are familiar with Victoria's Secret, which sells women's apparel. There was a company in Louisville, Kentucky that had 2 stores, and the name of the store was Victor's Little Secret. It's not the same as Victoria's Secret, but Victoria's Secret went to court and sued for trademark infringement because Victoria's Secret was trademarked. And the court sided with them because they said it was too similar and people may think they were shopping at the same area. So Victor's Little Secret got a cease and desist order. This is just some advice for patentists. If you're thinking about developing something that you think might be patentable, get advice from an attorney who knows patent law. Obviously, anybody outside the United States can still apply for a patent within the United States, and then the owners have the right to sell or license their product or the patent for use by others. Now, there is a subterfuge that's been going on. By the way, this is just a list of companies that have patents and a number of patents they hold. And I'm really not going to go into that. But there is a subterfuge going on that what is known as, I think the right term is called patent trolling. And companies will go through this and then they'll send the patent holder, a lot of times a small business or a small entrepreneur, and say, you know, we actually came up with that many years ago, and we'll settle this for such and such a case, such and such a price. Well, in many cases, they really never did have that patent. They just claimed that they had the idea, making it difficult to prove for the actual patent holder that he or she actually patented something that was original. And of course, they want to settle out of court and take money from people and things of that nature. That's died down a little bit, but many cases they win because somebody doesn't have the wherewithal to go through court proceedings. UCC, Uniform Commercial Code. Notice what it is. It's comprehensive commercial law that covers sales and other commercial laws. It has 11 articles, which we're not going to go through, but we will talk about some of them. And so you have some kind of an idea. I'm not sure that what I'm going to tell you now is still on the books, but at one time, the Uniform Commercial Code was applicable in all states except Louisiana, which still followed some of the Napoleonic Code. I'm not sure that's still true, but it was true at least 10 years ago. We're not going to talk about warranties. And of course, warranties we will find underneath in the Uniform Commercial Code. And what it says, what a warranty says, is we tell you, we the manufacturer, that the product we're selling to you will be acceptable to you, will meet the criteria that you want it to meet, and it will do what it is supposed to do. Now, there are two kinds of warranties. Express, that's something that the seller actually says to the buyer. And implied, notice what implied says. It's legally imposed on the seller, who implies that the product will conform to the standards of trade. The next area we want to cover are negotiable instruments. And what I want to say to you at the very beginning, let's get all this on the slide here. Is that a negotiable instrument does not have to be a standard contract. It can be something simply written in longhand by the maker, and then agreed to by the buyer. So notice that there are 4 conditions, and we're talking here about transferring something from the seller to the buyer. And as I said before, it has to be written and signed by the person who is offering this product, if you will, for lack of a better term, not for sale, but for transfer. Now, usually there's some money that changes hands or some other type of consideration. Payment must be made upon demand or at a future specified date. Payment must be made to the bearer, that is the person who made the contract, and contain an unconditional promise to pay a specified amount. So remember, this is no different than making an exchange at your local supermarket. You walk in and you want to buy a gallon of milk, and you go to the checkout person, and the checkout person says, okay, obviously don't do this, but okay, you want to buy that gallon of milk, it's going to cost you X dollars. And so you make an exchange. You exchange your money for the gallon of milk. And once that exchange is satisfied, you walk out the door. Don't satisfy the exchange. You don't walk out the door. Now, contract law goes back to something we talked about here just a second ago, negotiable instrument. Remember that it is legal. A contract is something that's legally enforceable, but does not have to have a specified form. It just has to be signed by the seller and by the buyer. Contract law tells us what constitutes a legally enforceable agreement in a breach of contract, so one person doesn't uphold his or her end of the bargain. It's really as simple as that. And we're going to get into the contract requirements. First of all, an offer has to be made. Go back to the gallon of milk. The supermarket is offering that milk for sale. The next is that there's a voluntary acceptance of the offer. Voluntary is the key word. If somebody is holding you against your will and you sign a contract, it is not legal. Both parties give consideration. I have this for sale and you have this to offer me, and I've got this, and you're going to give me that, and we'll exchange. You give me money, I give you the milk. Those people who enter into this contract are competent. If one person is not competent mentally, there's no contract. The contract is a legal act. And finally, it's in its proper form. Now remember, it doesn't have to have a form. It has buyer and all address and all kind of stuff. This has to be made out by the seller. Seller has to sign it. The buyer has to agree to it. He or she has to sign it. Has to be some kind of an exchange. And it's done. Now we know how contracts are breached. And if they are, and normally breach of contract will be adjudicated by the judiciary. And the rulings may say, okay, well, specific performance has to be rendered. The guilty party must pay the aggrieved party damages, maybe, and then the obligation can be discharged. In other words, there's no longer a contract. The Clayton Act of 1914 prohibits exclusive dealings, tying contracts. It's not something we see too much today, and or interlocking directories. Again, something that we do not see today. Right after the Clayton Act, we had the implementation of the Federal Trade Commission. It is primarily charged with preventing, to the best of its ability, unfair methods of competition in commerce. To strengthen the FTC, we had two acts. The Wheeler-Lee Amendment of 1938 gave the FTC additional control over false and misleading advertising. We find this often today, and usually what the FTC does is issue a cease and desist order. If it can get the cease and desist order implemented and followed, it and I've used that word, may not take additional legal action. Of course, it can take the miscreant to court, try to get money and have them pay restitution to people that have been bilked. The Robinson-Patman Act of 1936 prohibits price discrimination, and that applies to both buyers and sellers. This is just a history of high-profile antitrust cases in the United States. And you can see this graphically displayed, figure A3 at the bottom of page A11. I'm not going to go into that. We have some terms that you should know and should be interesting to you. Consumerism, that's a social movement. There's not a law behind here. But it's done to strengthen the rights of buyers in relationships to sellers. In other words, we're trying to do away with the old caveat emptor, buyer beware dictum that went on for many years. Of course, we had problems with the real estate market that began our financial meltdown in late 2007, early 2008. So that led to the implementation of the Dodd-Frank Reform Act. And it did create the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which many politicians are still fighting, and as are many industries. This is the number of identity theft complaints. I'm not going to go into that. The next we come to is a word that Americans hate. I have always said that tax is a four-letter word to most Americans. I realize that it's only 3 letters, but it's just like a 4-letter word. And so here we put the ES on the end of tax to talk about the fact that we have more than one tax. And then they're listed there: income tax, property tax, sales tax, etc. Governments institute taxes to increase revenue so that they can fund the programs that people want and need, like fire protection, police protection, library resources, and things of that nature, schools as well. I'm not going to get into sin taxes. That's just really a little bit more than what we really need to talk about. This asks the question, and I'm not going to, again, go into this to any great extent, and that is, do the rich pay tax? And the fact of the matter is, yes, they do pay tax. Now we're going to discuss bankruptcy laws. There are 3 types of bankruptcy. Chapter 7 is the one that most individuals would go through, and that is known as straight bankruptcy, as the slide says. Then we have 2 other ones: Chapter 11, which is reorganization, and the Chapter 13, which is a repayment plan. Those latter 2 are set up primarily for businesses. And the difference between the 2 is that in a reorganization, these both have to be adjudicated by a court. And then a reorganization, the company will go back to bankruptcy court and say, this is what we want to do. We want our creditors to buy into this, and this will give us amount of time to set our house straight and get out. And if the court agrees with that, there usually is a limit to the time that the organization has. I most often have seen 2 years. Sometimes it could be a little longer, sometimes a little bit less. But often what will happen in those 2 years, or what will happen is the court will say to the organization, okay, you have to file reports every so often, once a month or once a quarter, to show us your progress. If there is no progress, then that reorganization can be thrown out, and then something else will happen. Now, most of the time, creditors don't want that to happen because they want to get their money back. And then, of course, Chapter 13 simply sets up a payment plan or repayment plan and tells the organization, okay, you have to pay these people, this is what you have to pay them, and this is when you have to pay. This is just Chapter 7, bankruptcy, and this shows a procedure, if you will, people with secured claims, and then how they're going to be able to receive them. And you can see this graphically displayed here in figure A6 at the bottom of page A16. So this is how claims are paid in the order, and it just goes down this list. And then this is the graphic display, which I mentioned that you can see. We've had deregulation in a number of industries. Just simply saying here is the government, whatever government, and I'll explain that when I use the term whatever, takes away certain protections for our companies. And the object there is to make companies more efficient, and if we actually prop them up in a way by doing non-compete clauses and things of that nature at a certain level, it allows companies to be inefficient, excuse me, and really not to pay a lot of attention. In fact, I'll give you an example. Many years ago, I was in Oklahoma, and I was flying from Oklahoma City to Tulsa. Now, probably I wouldn't do that today. I'd think about, renting a car and driving, but I wasn't renting a car, and so I flew, and it's not a very long distance, something over 100 miles. Well, there were 26 people on this huge TWA plane. I just know TWA is no longer in business. Huge TWA plane. There were 26 passengers, and there were 7 crew. Now, yeah, 7 crew. And we got in, buckled up, and sat down, and we didn't see the flight staff from the time we took off until the time we landed. Really wasn't efficient for TWA to fly that route. It really probably wasn't cost effective for them to fly that route, but they could because regulation allowed them to do that. Once regulation was taken away, the object was that only the best would survive, those who were most efficient. What happens here often, this is where the public complains, when competition is lessened, or you have only so many major airlines like we do today, it's the public that pays for that because the price tends to go up. Even if they're more efficient, that efficiency is seldom passed along to the consumer. And so people complain about that. Robert Byrd, a longtime senator from West Virginia, said he had made 2 votes in the Senate, or cast 2 votes in the Senate, that he would like to take back. And one of the 2 was voting yes for airline deregulation. Telecommunications, up till 1983, AT&T and its various arms controlled the telecommunications industry in the United States, telephone, etc. So we didn't have too much internet and things of that nature in those days. And some public utilities have been deregulated. That falls to a state agency. One of the reasons we've not seen more deregulation in the utility industry is because it's very costly to stand up a utilities organization. And due to the cost, you don't see too many. I worked for a small nonprofit organization a few years ago, and we were solicited to change our gas supplier. And we did that. And we saved a little bit of money, and we had a contract that went for a year or maybe 2 years. I'm not really too sure. We never heard from them again after that. We went back to our regular provider. And this gives you an idea. And again, it's not something I'm going to go through. Gives you hamburger regulations. You can see this on figure A7 at the top of page A18. And that brings us to the end of bonus chapter A. It's 5:07. We'll take a short break to 5:09, and then we'll come back and do bonus chapter C, which is managing risk. Thank you. Please come back at 5:09. All right, 5:09, managing risk. Some of this will be applicable to businesses, but a lot of the rest of it will be applicable to individuals as well. Identify environmental changes that made risk management important. Explain the 4 ways of managing risk and distinguishing between insurable and uninsurable risk. Define insurance policies and explain the law of large numbers and the rule of indemnity. And finally, discuss various types of insurance businesses can buy to manage risk. The question that was posed here is, what is enterprise risk management? It's dealing with the risks the program will manage, risk management processes, technologies, and investments that are required, and how risk management efforts will be coordinated across a firm. Well, when it comes to an organization, company, firm, business, whatever term you prefer to use, I ask about risk, and risk is simply a chance of loss. That's the same thing that we homeowners go through with the risk of fire, with the risk of theft, with the risk of break-in, and things of that nature. And then with risk comes a probability of loss. For instance, a homeowner, if there's a fire at my house, what's my potential loss? Now, there are 2 kinds of risk. Speculative, which is kind of what I'm going through, and that's either a chance of profit or loss when it comes to a business. When we're thinking about the homeowner's house catching fire, it's speculative loss. You're not going to get a profit out of it. Pure risk is the fact that there is no way that there's going to be any type of profit. Threat of loss, no chance of profit. Well, we have to deal with risk and we have to anticipate it. And so the ways that we deal with it is to try to reduce the risk. Now, if you are at a business, you look at closing things off that are possible fire hazards. We could avoid the risk by going out of business, for instance, or changing the business that we have, or not offering certain products because they're too risky. We can self-insure against risk, which simply means I know there's a risk, but I'm not going to buy insurance because I think I can do the things necessary to reduce my risk, and that if I do have a problem, I'll be able to cover that out of my operating expenses. I won't have to buy insurance. And then finally, we can buy insurance. This is just talking about costly disasters, and I'm not going to go through that. They certainly are something that none of us wants to go through, but we don't need to talk about those to a great extent. We all know them. Most recent one was Sandy Hook. There have been several other ones, but Sandy Hook was probably pretty bad here a few years ago. Self-insurance I talked about. That's simply setting aside funds, my funds, to say, okay, I'll run the risk. I don't think that it's going to happen, but if it does, I have enough money to cover it because I think this is only what's going to happen. Notice the term they use, go bear. That's simply not buying insurance. And if it comes to paying claims, I'm going to pay claims out of my operating expenses. But I don't think that's going to happen. The following that you see on this slide are what are known as uninsurable risks. You cannot go to an insurance company and buy a policy. Notice what it's talking about: market risk, political risk. We don't usually have political risks in this country, and we haven't had them, and I hope that that will continue. Personal risk. If you do something that continue your behavior continually puts you at risk, nobody's going to insure you for that. That's like the person that has all sorts of DUIs or DOIs, or DWI, excuse me. Insurance companies are simply not going to do that. Hello. And then finally, operation. Hello. Do you have a question?
Oh, no, sorry, I forgot to mute.
That's perfectly okay. I want to make sure that you had a question. I took time to answer it. And then operational risk.
No.
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. And operational risk simply means you're doing something you ought not to be doing. And if you're doing that again, nobody's going to do that. Now I want to talk about market risk just for a second. Put this in parlance. A few years ago, Procter & Gamble stock declined precipitously. And some retirees wanted to take Procter & Gamble to court. Matter of fact, they did take Procter & Gamble to court and say, wait a minute, these people were doing things bad and the market went down and hit me in the wallet and things of that nature. Well, the court said, no, there's no standing here. You can't sue because of market vagaries. And that got thrown out of court because they were not absolutely able to prove that it was something that Procter & Gamble did by mismanagement that caused the stock market, caused the stock to drop. Now this is insurable risk. And notice what there's some requirements here. It has to be an insurable interest. It have to be able to measure the loss. And the second part is the same. Loss must be measurable. Chance of loss must be measurable. So it's really kind of the same thing. Notice what it says next. The loss has to be accidental. If the loss is from your own malfeasance, the insurance company is not going to pay. And then talking about how the risk is dispersed, that's the thing of having many people owning an insurance policy, so the risk can be spread out over a long period of time. And then the insurance company can tell you, these are the standards that we have, and if you don't adhere to these standards, we're not going to accept your risk. We're not going to insure your risk. Now, this is the types of public insurance that you can get, or that we do get. And notice the time, they're listed here in the text. Figure C.1 on page C5 starts with unemployment compensation, and it goes all the way down to the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. And so that's type of insurance if you want to stop and think about. We don't always think of Social Security, for instance, as being insurance. Insurance policy is simply a contract. And the contract will stay in force until such time as we, a policyholder, stop remitting payment, or until the insurance company says to us, well, we're not going to accept that risk any longer because of your behavior. So the premium is what we pay, and a claim is what we send to the insurance company when we've had some type of loss. And then we're asking the insurance company for remuneration. As I alluded to before, and I didn't use this term, the law of large numbers allows insurance companies to exist because they can pass that claim, that loss, over to a large number of people. And they have actuaries that say how often this type of loss will occur, and then in a certain period of time, so they have an idea of how much money they can charge. And then, of course, they charge money based upon your behavior. If you're a young person getting a driver's license, your risk your chance of risky driving behavior is significantly higher than someone who's in his or her 30s or 40s. And so that rate is very high. Some people may argue with that. Now we know rates for driving and driver's policies can go down if you go to a driver's school or take additional driver's training or something of that nature. The rule of indemnity says that a person who is insured cannot collect more than the actual loss. Two types of insurance companies. This is just for your general knowledge. It's not a big issue. A stock company is owned just like any publicly traded company. No difference. A mutual company, on the other hand, is owned by the policy owners. You could kind of look at a mutual company something similar to a credit union. Not obviously not the same, but something similar to a credit union. And this just gives you an idea of stock companies, some of the ones that you would know, and the mutual companies on the right, some again that you would know. Health insurance, all of us have to have that to some extent. The Affordable Care Act has allowed many more people to become covered by insurance. However, this is a volatile industry. We're still liable to see, unfortunately, still liable to see insurance premiums continue to increase. Disability insurance usually comes from your employer through a state agency where some of your income is continued while you're unable to work. Workers' compensation, on the other hand, guarantees payment of wages, medical care in some cases, and rehabilitation for people who are injured on the job, again, in some cases. I say in some cases because it doesn't apply across the board. People who file workers' compensation don't always ask for each of those things, and so that happens. So that's why I'm saying sometimes it doesn't happen all the time. This just gives you some healthy lifestyle to figure out how you're going to get the best bang for your buck for insurance. Hello?
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I just want to make sure I'm not missing something that you want to ask. Professional liability insurance, these are people who are usually in the medical profession, sometimes the legal profession. This is holding them against negligence, protecting them against negligence, protecting them against suits of negligence, excuse me. And of course, we live in a litigious society, so a lot of those do happen. Product liability insurance is the same thing, except it's for a product and a particular company as opposed to a professional. Notice here that homeowners' policies do not always protect for a person running a home-based business. So if you do have a home-based business and you have a homeowner's policy, you might want to check and make sure that you're covered for whatever needs to be covered for the business. You may want to change your policy to make sure it is. And cyber risk insurance can help you as well, but again, it's something that you need to make sure that is either in your policy or asking for a rider to cover that. We have ended bonus chapter C, 523. We'll take a short break to 525 and come back and talk about finance, mostly in a way of personal finance, mostly managing personal finance. Please come back 525. Thank you. All right, 525, bonus chapter D, managing personal finances. This is a short chapter, but I think it provides some interesting information, and it's certainly applicable to most of us. Outline the 6 steps for controlling your assets. Explain how to build a financial base, including investing in real estate, saving money, and managing credit. Explain how buying the appropriate insurance can protect your financial base. And outline a strategy for retiring with enough money to last a lifetime. Well, these are the 6 steps to controlling your personal finances. Make sure you know what you have. Keep track of what you spend. Prepare a budget. And I always like to talk about this just for a second. In preparing a budget, it doesn't mean you need to stick to it 100% of the time. But what it is it gives you a roadmap. It gives you a blueprint. It says, this is telling me what I ought to spend, and I ought not to go out past this. Pay off what you owe. If it's credit card, pay it off as quickly as you possibly can, because the interest rate on a credit card is continuous. Now, what I mean by that is that most credit cards are around 18 to 20%, some a little bit higher. You can find some a little bit less than that, but 13% is about the lowest I've heard. If you pay the minimum amount that's due, you're going to owe whatever is due the next month, plus that 18% is going to come back again next month. So pay them off as quickly as you can. Have some kind of a savings plan. Now, I know in some respects that's kind of a misnomer today, because, and I'll give you an example. I have a cousin who's in her 90s, and I have her power of attorney. And we were just talking to her the other day. She has a fairly large certificate of deposit, a savings and loan, where her dad was treasurer for a number of years and was president for a number of years. And she's getting 0.15% interest. And that's just not a lot of money. Now, she doesn't have to worry about where her next dollar is coming from, and so it doesn't make a lot of difference. But start a savings plan. Can be something, can be savings, can be stock market and things of that nature. Of course, I want to stop back here for a second and tell you the stock market's not insured, so you have to be careful about what you're doing. Obviously, if you're a younger person, you can tolerate more risk. We just talked about in the last chapter. Older person doesn't want that much risk. So, figure out what your risk is as well, and what your tolerance for risk is as well when you're trying to do this. Notice the last. Borrow only to buy assets that will increase in value. Normally, this is talking about buying a piece of real estate or buying a house. It is not buying a car. A car depreciates. It never gets back to where it was. Now, oh yeah, somebody's going to tell me, okay, I bought a classic car. You won't know you bought a classic car in 25 or 30 years if you buy it new today. Now, yeah, if you went out to some auction and bought a classic car, like a 58 Cadillac or something like that, yeah, that's a classic car. But you're only going to be able to sell that for increased money to another buyer who is into classic cars. And that market is not that large, so you don't want to do something like that. This is what your household budget generally has. We don't really need to go over that, but we'll talk about, it's either what you pay in mortgage or your rent, what you pay for clothing and food and other type things. And what is mentioned here, except when we get to the last, other expenses, those are almost all requirements. Now, you could say, oh, I don't need to do insurance. Now, that may be true. I wouldn't ever tell anybody to go down that road. But the first 3 are almost necessities. Yes, there are people that can do away with owning their own vehicle, but then they almost not always have to pay for other types of transportation. And most of us do want some kind of furniture around. Of course, we could use the bare necessities, but regardless, we're going to have them. So we need to think about that. That's what our budget is. And other expenses are things that you do that are not required. They're not necessities in life. And those are the ones that you can really manage and say, I can pull back on this. If I buy a cup of coffee every day on my way to work, I can stop someplace and buy a cup of coffee, and I'm not buying a designer cup of coffee. It's going to cost me a little bit less money. I only use that as an example. Not necessarily that's the best example, but I only use it as an example. And this next slide, which you can see at the top of page D5, figure D1, talks about what I just mentioned. And then this is how your money grows at the rate of return. I would like to see a rate of return of over 2%, let alone 5, 8, or 11%. But this is just an idea, and you can see this again graphically displayed in your text, figure D2 at the bottom of page D5. And this gives us easy budget cuts. Some we may not want to do. What is it you want to give up? What is it you can do without? I think that's the way to look at it. What can I cut back on that's not going to affect my lifestyle? And do things like that. I'll give you a perfect example. Now, it's not something that I do, but I'll give you a perfect example. You like to read, and if you have a Kindle or something like that, get books from the library. Don't buy books. You can get them from the library. You're already paying tax for the library. That's what my wife does. She reads almost all the books that she reads. She doesn't have a Kindle. She has a Nook, I think is what it is. I'm a little bit different. I buy books because I like to have them. But that's something you can cut back on. And you're not depriving your lifestyle because books are easy to get from the library. Well, at least they are from our library. I'm not going to go through that slide. We don't need to talk about that. How else can you manage your budget? Well, if both of you work, both you and your spouse work, try to live on one salary. If you want to invest in something, buy what's commonly known as a starter home. You put a little money into it, you should be able to get your investment back, plus make a little bit of money. And you buy for the long term. Same way with stocks. You get into the stock market. Your stock market for the long term is usually a hold strategy, or try to make it a hold strategy. Don't live beyond your means. Some things are nice to do, but if it's going to be costly, it's going to drive you to some problems and cause major disconnect between you and your spouse. It's not something you want to do. I think the first thing there is it says it's very important for all of us to think about. Don't give up something you really like. Find something that you can give up. It's not going to cause you to change your lifestyle. There's a thing there that says don't go shopping without knowing what you want to buy. I have an old saw here that I say, and this is not meant to be a biased statement, although it's going to sound like it. I say that for the most part, men tend to be buyers and women tend to be shoppers. And when I go to buy something for my wife for her birthday, and I don't buy anything for our anniversary because we usually go to dinner on our anniversary, and it's a major celebration for us. I have an idea what I want to buy. I don't shop around. I will look around to make sure I'm getting what I want to get, and that I'm getting the bang for my buck. And I won't buy certain things that are made in some countries. But I have an idea when I go. That doesn't mean you shouldn't comparison shop and things like that. But what happens if you don't have an idea what you're going for? You tend to buy more than what you want, or more than what you intended, driving up your cost. Well, there are financial benefits in living in your own home and buying your own home through a mortgage. And you have to understand something, and I think many of us don't at the beginning. You have to upkeep your home if you intend to get back out of it what you put into it, plus a little bit more. So you are going to be doing some spending, but it's also a way to help you build up equity. If you have a mortgage, the interest payment is tax deductible. And notice that the last thing down here. Where you buy a home is important. It uses the 3 words location, but I would like to talk about other things. And location is part of that. Good school district, good access to public transportation, good access to fire and police protection. That comes with location, but those are all things that you want to consider when you buy a home. The question here is how much house or home can you afford? And it's not something that I want to go through again, but you can see this figure D3 at the top of page D8. You don't live beyond your means when you're buying a home. The same thing goes in there. Here's the thing about the stock market. And I'm going to use a little bit different than what they say about there. Don't jump on a stock because everybody and their brother and sister is buying a stock. Don't sell simply because something is going down. Get in the stock market and think about holding. Don't think about buying and selling. Most of us are not sophisticated enough to do that. Now I know people have been in the stock market and things of that nature, and those people are sophisticated enough. But most of the rest of us are not. So have a good strategy when you want to buy stock or buy bonds, and stay with it for the long term. If you can't afford to do that, and I understand that, you ought to think twice about getting in the stock market because it's volatile. And it's even volatile, even if you're in stocks that have relatively low risk. It's still volatile. Volatility is not as great, but it's still volatile. All this just talks about what it costs if you go to college. Most people do take out loans. Don't take out more than what you need. There are a lot of scholarships and grants and aids and things out there. Think about that. Pursue them, and you're going to be better off, and you're going to feel better off about it. Don't get yourself caught in too much debt. We do have new consumer protection agencies. We talked about credit card before. I'm not going to beat this over the head. Watch credit card debt. It can eat your lunch before you know it. And don't take any more than what you have to. Pay off your debt as quickly as can. Remember, and I think what happens is a lot of people don't think about this. When we use the credit card, we're actually being loaned money. So think of every time you use a credit card, you're actually asking the card lender for money. And we all know we have to pay off loans, but we don't always think about that about credit cards. So try to think about that as you're going through the credit card business. What is it that I'm doing here? Do I really need to do it? By the way, I'm not saying don't think that I am. Don't have a credit card. That's not my point. My point is to make sure that you're doing what you need to do. Yeah, pay your bills on time, etc. It's just credit card rating, which I'm not going to go through. This talks about insurance. What I would say about insurance is, if you're going to buy insurance, especially personal insurance, some type of life insurance, get with somebody that you know and that you trust. Because often a person is buying the wrong type of insurance. Now, I'm not an insurance person, and I'm not trying to demean the industry, but sometimes we buy insurance policies. I'm saying we as a general thing, we buy insurance policies that are not the right policies to buy. So buy something that fits your budget, will give you the protection that you need, and then you can go on for someplace else. Term insurance for a young person may be the best thing to buy. It gives an amount of payout if something happens to that person, and the cost is usually much less. So do your homework, just like the stock market. Find out what it is and how to get it, and get with somebody that you know and will give you good advice, and someone that you trust. Annuity is the contract for regular payments for a period of time, and it obviously can guarantee income. We have two. We have fixed and variable, Again, find out what you're buying, have confidence in the person you're buying it, make sure that it's from a reputable firm, and that the annuity is what you need as opposed to something else. Disability insurance, yes, you can buy that. I don't necessarily recommend it. One of those things you should get if you think you need it. If your business is going to be, if it affects your business, certainly you want to have it, things of that nature. Now, what homeowners insurance covers, an umbrella policy, obviously, that's putting all your insurance needs under one policy as opposed to having a number of other policies. Healthcare and health insurance, we mentioned this before in the last chapter. It's a big issue. You just talk to your employer, make sure you get the right kind of health insurance coverage for what you and your family need. Again, don't get more than what you do need, and choose wisely. I'm sorry I went back. I made a mistake about where I'm going to go. Social Security, old age survivors disability insurance. And there's the word insurance most of us don't think about. We just think about Social Security, but that's how the act was passed in 1935. We as individuals pay 6.2% of our income from a company into Social Security. The employer matches that with another 6.2%. And if you're a sole proprietor in a business, you pay double. One as an employee, one as an employer. Social Security is hard pressed. Congress has continued to kick the can down the road. We ought to stop and think about what it is we're trying to do for Social Security, and maybe it's time to either up the ante and how much we're paying, or increase the amount that people have to pay. For instance, right now, you only pay on, I think it's the first $104,000 or $5,000 that you make. Well, there's a person making $250,000, $300,000 a year. Why is he or she not paying in that extra income? That would help. But of course, as soon as you do that, then you're picking on some constituency and they don't like it, and people get mad, and then nothing gets done. We have to stand up. We have to tell our elected representatives and senators what we expect of them and hold them to that. Individual retirement accounts. This talks about the IRAs, Roth IRA, which you can pay into. And when you take the Roth IRA out, there's no income tax. Roth IRAs have kind of fallen out of favor for some reason. I'm not really too sure why, but they have. The new Roth, as mentioned down here, this is for low and middle income individuals. Probably a lot of people don't know about this. And this would be a good way for people to do this. But what's the problem here is an education thing, because a lot of people on the lower income spectrum, and I don't mean this to be prejudicial, please don't misunderstand me. They're more concerned with keeping body and soul together, and they don't think for the long term. And so it's an education thing. And if you can teach people that, saving a little bit, I don't know what the little bit would be for this particular, but saving a little bit will help you in the long run. We Americans don't tend to think for the long term, and we do that at our peril. I'm not just talking about people on the lower side of the income spectrum. We're all in that category. We don't think for the long term. We think for the short term. We're always looking for the silver bullet. 401k plans, some of us have those. People who work for nonprofits are into what is known as a 403b plan. It's similar, but it is different. And 401k, amount of money that you can put into a pension plan, your employer, if he or she is able, can match up to a certain amount. But one thing I want to tell you is, if you get into a 401k plan, and I certainly encourage you to do that, because what you contribute, whether it's a Roth or a regular straight 401k plan, what you put in is not taxed. So that comes off the top. So if you make $1,000 a week and you put $100 a week into the 401k plan, that your taxable income has dropped to $900. Now, regular 401k, when you start taking that out, you have to start taking it out at age 70.5. You'll get taxed on that. But one thing I want to tell you, I almost forgot, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Many times a company will try to get you to continue buying their stock as part of your 401k plan. I'm not telling you don't do that. What I'm telling you is don't make all your purchases for that company's stock. That's just not a good idea, no matter how good the stock is. And these are the benefits. We talked about the first one. Your taxable income is reduced. Tax is deferred. And usually when your tax is deferred, so after you're retired and you should be, not always, but should be earning less income, so it means your tax liability will be reduced. A Kehoe plan is similar to a 401k. It's set up for entrepreneurs and people that own small businesses. Finally, think about doing some estate planning. That's something we want to talk about, but think about where your money is going to go and what you want to do with it. And then have a will. You may want to have a will and then have it rechecked every 5 or 10 years to make sure everything's still there. And then have an executor. It could be your spouse. It could be someone else. The person who knows what your assets are and knows your plan and will disperse them upon your demise. Well, that brings us to the end of bonus chapter D. There is no lecture question for this week. I want to thank each and every one of you that attended the lectures. I will have this is recorded, and I'll have this uploaded to Campus Web for you by tomorrow. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
And good night. Good night to you.
Yep. Bye-bye.